She deleted everything, 4 years of memories, 200 contacts, every photo, every text thread, every trace of the life she had built beside a man who turned out to be a stranger wearing a familiar face. Sophie Bennett sat on her kitchen floor at 2 a.m. and erased them all without flinching. But when her thumb hovered over one name, Landon Hayes, she stopped. She stared at it for a long time. Then she put the phone face down on the tile and pressed her back against the cabinet until her breathing slowed. She couldn't do it. She didn't know why. If this story finds something real inside you, something you've been carrying but haven't said out loud, stay with me until the end. Drop a like, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bakery smelled like burnt sugar and something close to salvation. Sophie had learned early on that the oven didn't care what kind of night you'd had. It didn't adjust its temperature out of sympathy or give you an extra 10 minutes because your eyes were swollen. At 5:47 in the morning, 3 weeks after Marcus had moved the last of his things out of her apartment, she stood at the stainless steel counter with flour on her forearms and a crack running through the skin of her right knuckle, where she'd been washing her hands too often in cold water. The croissants needed folding. The croissants did not care about Marcus. She folded. It was the job that had kept her upright through the worst of it. Not therapy, not wine, not the well-meaning phone calls from friends who wanted the story so they could form opinions about it. The job. Showing up before the sun did. Doing the one thing her hands knew how to do without her brain needing to participate. Celine, the head pastry chef who had hired Sophie 6 years ago, on nothing more than a gut feeling and a tasting of Sophie's brown butter financiers, stopped beside her at the counter and didn't say anything for a moment. She just watched Sophie's hands move. "You're overworking the dough," Celine finally said. "I know. It'll be tough." "I know." Celine nodded once and moved on. That was the thing about working in a kitchen. Nobody had time for emotions before 9 a.m., and by some unspoken mercy, nobody pretended otherwise. Sophie appreciated that more than she could say. The breakup itself hadn't been dramatic, which somehow made it worse. No screaming, no thrown dishes, no moment where Marcus had said something so terrible that she could point to it later and say, "There, that was the reason. That was the crack that split everything open." Instead, it had been quiet in the way that things get quiet right before they stop existing altogether. Conversations that ended a sentence too early. Silences over dinner that stretched past comfortable into something else. The particular specific way he had stopped reaching for her hand when they walked, not in a moment of anger, but just gradually and then permanently, like her hand was something he'd forgotten he used to want. They had been together for 3 years. Sophie had been preparing herself for the end for maybe 6 months before it actually came. That was the part nobody told you about. The way grief could start before the thing was even finished. The way you could be mourning a relationship that was technically still happening, sitting across from someone at a dinner table and already missing them even though they were right there. He had said, "I think we both know this isn't working anymore." She had said, "Yeah," and that was it. 3 years compressed into 4 words and a look that passed between them like something formal, like signing paperwork. She had cried in the car on the way home. Then she had come inside, sat on the kitchen floor because the couch had somehow felt too far away, and she had started deleting. She wasn't sure what started it exactly. Some impulse that felt less like grief and more like self-preservation. The need to look at her life and figure out what was actually hers, and what had been borrowed from a version of herself she didn't want to be anymore. Marcus's friends. Gone. The mutual acquaintances from the years they'd overlapped. The couples. The dinner party people. The ones who would inevitably take sides or ask uncomfortable questions, or give her that particular look that was halfway between pity and fascination. Gone. The college friend she had let drift into Marcus-adjacent orbit without realizing it. Gone. The ex-coworker who had always been slightly more his friend than hers. Gone. She went through her contacts with something approaching surgical detachment, and what surprised her, what she would think about for weeks afterward, was how few people remained when she was done. How many names she held up to the light, looked at from the outside, and realized with a quiet shock that she couldn't honestly say whether they were there because they wanted to be or because they just never thought to leave. Some people were in her life the way furniture was in a room. You stopped seeing it after a while. You didn't know if you actually liked it or if it had just been there so long you assumed you did. She cleared those people out too. Not with anger, with something quieter and more honest. By the time she was done, her contacts list looked like a different person's phone. A smaller life, maybe, but a more accurate one. And in the middle of all that emptiness, one name was still there. Landon Hayes. She had stopped at it, her thumb hovering, her breathing uneven. She'd looked at his name for a long time, and something in her chest had pulled in a way that she didn't have language for yet. She put the phone down before she could examine it too closely. She told herself she'd figure that out later. Landon Hayes had not, to his knowledge, done anything differently that Tuesday. He had gotten Mia up at 6:30, which was a 10-minute negotiation involving 3 rounds of 5 more minutes, and eventually the strategic deployment of the phrase, "there's waffles." He had packed her backpack while she ate. He had signed the permission slip that had been sitting on the counter for 4 days because he kept forgetting. He had driven her to school, listened to the same Taylor Swift song twice in a row because she was in a phase, and told her he loved her when she climbed out of the car without looking back because 7-year-olds did not have time for visible affection in the school drop-off lane. Then he had driven to his offices in the Flatiron District and spent the first 3 hours of his morning in back-to-back meetings about the acquisition of a mid-sized logistics company that his CFO was excited about and that Landon had mixed feelings about for reasons he hadn't fully articulated yet. He had eaten lunch at his desk, a sandwich from the place downstairs, the same order he'd been getting for 2 years, turkey and Swiss on sourdough, and somewhere around 1 p.m. he had picked up his phone to text Sophie something mundane. A stupid meme he'd seen, some minor complaint about his 10 a.m. that she would have had a sharp, funny thing to say about. He had opened the message thread and started typing, and then he'd stopped, because he'd realized he didn't know if she was okay. He hadn't talked to her in almost 2 weeks, which wasn't completely unusual. They both had lives that got busy. They weren't the kind of friends who required daily check-ins to maintain the thing between them. But he knew she and Marcus had ended things. Her younger sister Jenna had mentioned it in passing while Sophie wasn't around. The way people mention something they assume you already know. He hadn't already known. He'd sat with that information for a while. Then he'd done what felt natural, which was to give her space, because Sophie didn't like being hovered over and she would reach out when she was ready. But now, 2 weeks in, looking at the message thread, he scrolled up just a little, the way you do when you're checking to make sure you're not misremembering, and he saw the last thing she'd sent him was a photo of a catastrophically lopsided cake she'd made at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday with the caption, "Disaster, absolute disaster. I've lost the ability to bake and possibly to live." He had responded, "That cake looks fine. What's it supposed to be?" She had sent back, "It was supposed to be a cake." He had sent back a laughing emoji, and she had sent back 3, and that was the last thing between them. He set the phone down and stared at the wall of his office for a moment. He sent, "Hey, you okay?" 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Then, "Yeah, sorry I've been MIA. Work's been crazy." He looked at that for a moment. "You sure?" A longer pause this time. "I'm fine, Landon. Really, just needed some quiet time." He knew not to push. With Sophie, pushing made her go further in, not further out. She was the kind of person who would tell you exactly what she was thinking if you didn't make her feel cornered, and who would tell you absolutely nothing if you did. "Okay," he typed. "I'm here when you want to not be quiet." She sent back a single heart, small and red. The kind of thing that could mean 100 different things depending on who sent it and what was behind it. He put his phone away and went back to the logistics company acquisition and spent the next 40 minutes trying to figure out why he couldn't stop thinking about that heart. Dead. Landon Hayes, by most measurable standards, had too much going on to be this preoccupied with a text message. At 32, he ran a holding company with interests in commercial real estate, a tech infrastructure platform, and a recently acquired chain of urban co-working spaces that his team was in the middle of rebranding. The company had cleared $200 million in revenue the previous fiscal year. He had a board, a CFO he trusted implicitly, a COO who terrified him slightly, and a PA named Dre who managed his life with the quiet efficiency of an air traffic controller. He had a 7-year-old daughter who could negotiate like a seasoned attorney and had recently informed him, very seriously, that she wanted to be either a marine biologist or a pop star, and she had not decided yet, and he should not rush her. He had a penthouse apartment in the West Village that cost more per month than most people made in a year, and that he had decorated almost entirely by accident, furniture chosen because it fit the space, art chosen because his designer had good taste and he hadn't objected strongly enough, none of it really his in any meaningful way. He had success. He had money. He had respect. He was, by the reckoning of most people who knew him at arm's length, very much fine, but fine was not the same as full. Landon had learned that distinction early and had spent years trying to figure out what to do with it. Mia's mother, Kara, had left when Mia was 3. It hadn't been a clean ending, it rarely was. Kara was not a bad person. She was, in the particular way of some people, someone who had discovered she wanted different things than the life she'd agreed to, and who had been honest about that rather than staying and resenting everyone in the room. She saw Mia during holidays and summer weeks and called on birthdays. It wasn't nothing, but it also meant that for the last 4 years, Landon had been doing the raising alone. Not alone. He had resources that most single parents didn't. He was aware of that. He wasn't foolish enough to ignore it. But emotionally, in the ways that counted, it was just him and Mia and the space between them that he tried every day to fill with enough warmth to make it feel like a complete thing. Sophie had appeared in his life a little over 4 years ago through the kind of overlap that happens in New York. A mutual friend's birthday dinner, one of those long tables where you end up next to someone by accident and stay in conversation for 3 hours because it turns out you both have opinions about the same things and the same way of finding absurdity in situations that other people take too seriously. She had made him laugh twice in the first 10 minutes, which was not a small thing. He was not a particularly easy laugh. They had exchanged numbers at the end of the night. Not in a charged way, not with any particular intention beyond I'd like to talk to this person again. And that had been the beginning of something that had no clean category. And therefore, he had decided a long time ago, didn't need one. Sophie was his friend, his best friend, if he was being honest, which he usually was with himself even when he wasn't entirely with the rest of the world. She was the person he called when something happened that he wanted to process out loud. She was the person whose opinion he wanted on decisions that had nothing to do with business. When Mia had gone through a phase of nightmares that left her screaming at 2 a.m., 3 nights a week it was Sophie he'd texted in the dark, half out of his mind with exhaustion and worry, and she had stayed up talking him through it for an hour and a half, not with advice necessarily, but with presence. The particular kind of presence she had that made you feel less alone in whatever room you were standing in. He had told himself, every time he noticed the way she filled up a room just by being in it, that it was friendship. He believed this mostly because it was easier than the alternative. The first time Landon heard about the contact purge was from Jenna. Sophie's younger sister was 24, worked in a yoga studio, and had the general energy of someone who ran on cold brew and the deep personal conviction that the universe was paying close attention. She was not a gossip exactly, but she was the kind of person who assumed that if she knew something, you probably already knew it, and so she shared information without attaching much weight to it. They ran into each other at the farmer's market on a Saturday in late October. Landon with Mia, who was deeply focused on negotiating for a small jar of hot honey, and Jenna with a canvas tote full of heirloom tomatoes she would definitely not eat before they went bad. "How's Sophie doing?" he asked, because she was on his mind. She'd been on his mind more than he'd been admitting. Jenna tilted her head. "She's okay. She did this whole thing after the breakup where she kind of cleared house, like deleted basically everyone from her phone." "Deleted everyone?" "Like, not maliciously. She wasn't mad at anyone, she just... You know how Sophie gets when she's in a certain mode? She went through everything and kept only the people who she felt like were genuinely hers, not tied to Marcus, not there for complicated reasons." Jenna shrugged. She got pretty ruthless about it. Landon said. Mia pulled his sleeve. "Dad, the honey." "1 second, bud." He looked back at Jenna. "So she kept like 8 people," Jenna said. "Me, obviously, our cousin Priya, a few people from work, and you." She said the last part like it was obvious, like it was the least surprising thing in the world. Then she wandered off toward the cheese table because Jenna had the attention span of a golden retriever in a park, and the conversation was apparently finished. Landon stood there for a moment. Mia tugged again. "Dad." "Yeah," he said. "Sorry, let's get the honey. What's up?" He didn't bring it up with Sophie. He told himself this was because it wasn't his place. She hadn't told him. She hadn't made a point of it. The fact that she'd kept his name wasn't something she'd offered. It was something that had slipped out sideways through her sister. And the respectful thing, the thing a good friend would do, was to put it back in the drawer and leave it there. He was very bad at leaving it there. The information sat in the back of his mind the way a stone sits in your shoe. Not always the first thing you feel, but making itself known at odd moments. In the car on the way home from a particularly empty evening. In the gap between putting Mia to sleep and falling asleep himself. When the apartment got quiet and the quiet had a texture to it that he couldn't always name. She had kept only 8 people. People who were genuinely hers, Jenna had said, and one of them was him. He kept turning that over, looking at it from different angles, trying to figure out what it was that he was actually feeling and why he was having such difficulty just feeling it clearly. What he kept coming back to was this. Sophie Bennett had looked at every relationship in her life with fresh eyes, stripped away every reason except the purest one. Does this person genuinely choose me? And had kept him. That meant something. He wasn't exactly sure what, but it meant something, and he was done pretending it didn't. November came in cold and windy, the way November in New York tends to do, not gradually, but all at once. Like the city had lost patience with the transition and decided to skip it. Landon and Sophie had fallen back into their rhythm by then. Coffee on weekends when their schedules aligned, long text threads about nothing in particular. She had come over one Sunday afternoon and spent 2 hours in his kitchen teaching Mia how to make cinnamon rolls from scratch, both of them covered in flour and deeply pleased with themselves about it, while Landon sat at the kitchen island and watched and felt something that he did not examine very carefully. Sophie was good with Mia in a way that wasn't performed. She didn't adjust her vocabulary or put on a special cheerful voice the way some adults did around children. She just talked to her, like a person, like someone whose opinions mattered, like a 7-year-old was a worthy conversational partner, which Mia very much was. And Mia, who had her father's ability to detect insincerity from across a room, had loved her from the start. "Your friend Sophie is really cool," Mia had told him once, very matter-of-factly, while he was doing her hair before school. "Yeah," he'd said. "She is. Is she your girlfriend?" "No, bud. She's my friend." Mia had considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "That seems like a waste," she'd said, and he had tied off her braid and said, "Okay, let's go." And she had dropped it because she was 7 and had already moved on to a more pressing question about whether penguins could feel sad. But he hadn't dropped it. Not really. He went to the bakery on a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday in mid-November, and he had not planned to go. He had a meeting at 4, a dinner with an investor at 7, a stack of emails that had been waiting patiently for his attention since Monday. The bakery was in the West Village, a narrow-fronted place called Loon that smelled the way all good bakeries smell. Warm and yeasty and sweet, in a way that wasn't cloying but felt like actual comfort, the kind that doesn't try. He had stopped in before, occasionally. It wasn't unusual. He knew Celine by name, and she knew his order, an espresso and whatever the day's special was, and sometimes he and Sophie would sit at the small table in the corner for 20 minutes before her shift ended and talk about whatever needed talking about. But that Wednesday he had come with something to say, and he hadn't fully admitted that to himself until he was already standing outside on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his coat, looking at the lit-up window. He went in. Sophie was at the counter, sliding a tray of something into the display case. She had flour on the sleeve of her chef's jacket, and her hair was up in that particular way she wore it at work. Not neat, just up, with pieces escaping in whatever direction they wanted. And she looked up when the door opened, the automatic customer greeting expression already starting to form on her face. Then she saw it was him. The expression softened into something genuine. That was the thing about Sophie's face. You could see the difference. The face she showed the world and the face she actually had. "Hey," she said, "I didn't know you were coming by." "I was in the neighborhood," he said. She looked at him. Sophie Bennett had a very particular way of looking at people when she didn't entirely believe what they'd just said. Not accusing, just perceptive, like she was filing the information away. Right, she said. The usual? Sure. He sat at the corner table. She brought over the espresso and a small plate with 2 madeleines on it, warm from the oven. She had a few minutes before she needed to start the closing tasks, and she sat down across from him with a cup of tea cradled in both hands, the way she always did when she needed warmth more than caffeine. They talked for a while about unimportant things. Something funny, Mia had said. A customer that week who had insisted that Sophie's croissants weren't as good as the ones from a bakery in Paris. A bakery, Sophie noted with great feeling, that she was relatively sure did not actually exist. Did you make that up? He asked. No, he described the street, very specifically, very wrongly. So he made it up? He absolutely made it up, and somehow that made it worse. Landon smiled. This was the thing about being with Sophie. There was always something to smile about. Not because she manufactured cheerfulness or worked hard at being entertaining. It just happened. The way good bread just happened when the ingredients were right. He looked at his espresso for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. You're going to anyway. Fair. He looked up at her. After the breakup, you deleted a lot of people. Her hands tightened slightly around the cup. Just a fraction. He noticed. Jenna, she said. Flat. Jenna, he confirmed. She mentioned it. Not like she wasn't trying to tell me anything. It just came up. Sophie was quiet for a moment. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the middle distance in the way she did when she was thinking and didn't want to be rushed through it. Yeah, she said finally. I did. You kept me. The words landed quietly in the space between them. Sophie looked at the table. Something moved across her face, a flash of something he couldn't read, something that was there and then gone. I kept 8 people, she said. I know. She still wasn't looking at him. Sophie. He kept his voice even. Why did you keep me? For a long moment she didn't say anything. Then the corner of her mouth pulled up. Not a full smile, just the start of one, the particular kind of half smile she wore when she was feeling something she wasn't ready to say out loud. Her eyes flicked up to his briefly, and then away. The madeleines are better today, she said. The butter to flour ratio, Sophie. I'm just saying. I noticed. She stopped. She looked at him then, really looked at him. And in the several seconds that passed while neither of them said anything, Landon thought he could see it. Whatever it was she'd been not saying, it was right there at the surface of her, close enough to touch. Then she exhaled and looked away. It's late, she said. I've got closing stuff. He didn't push. He finished his espresso. She walked him to the door. They hugged the way they always hugged. Her arms around his middle, his around her shoulders, the kind of hug that had always felt to him like arriving somewhere. Text me when you're home, she said. I will. He stepped out into the cold. On the sidewalk, before he'd taken 5 steps, he stopped. He stood there for a moment with the November wind doing what November wind does, and he thought about the smile, the half smile, the way her hands had tightened on the cup. He thought about a lot of things standing there on that sidewalk, and he made a decision not about what to do with any of it, but simply about what he was finally willing to admit to himself. He'd been choosing her, too, for 4 years, quietly, in every small way that didn't require naming. He had been choosing her. The first person he wanted to tell good news to, the voice he wanted in his ear when something went wrong, the one presence that made his very large, very expensive, very empty apartment feel like it could be a place where someone actually lived. He'd been calling it friendship. He didn't think that was quite right anymore. He texted her when he got home. She sent back a thumbs up. He sat on the couch for a long time after that, the apartment quiet around him, Mia asleep down the hall, the city doing its nighttime thing outside the tall windows. He thought about a smile he couldn't stop thinking about. And he thought, I have to say it. He just wasn't sure yet what it actually was, or how you said it without breaking something that you couldn't afford to lose. The smile stayed with him longer than it had any right to. That was the thing Landon kept coming back to in the days after the bakery. Not the conversation itself, not even what Sophie hadn't said, but the specific quality of that half smile. The way it had appeared and disappeared so quickly, like something that had slipped out before she could catch it. He'd seen Sophie smile 1,000 times. He knew her whole catalog, the loud laugh she got when something genuinely surprised her, the flat, unamused expression she wore when someone said something stupid but expected credit for it, the soft, distracted smile she had when she was thinking about something else entirely, and her face just did whatever it wanted. This one had been different. He couldn't explain exactly how. He just knew it. He went about his week. Meetings, calls, a site visit to one of the co-working spaces in Midtown that was underperforming in a way his team hadn't fully diagnosed yet. He picked Mia up from school 3 out of 5 days and listened to detailed reports on the social dynamics of second grade, which were, by any objective measure, more politically complex than most boardrooms he'd sat in. He ordered Thai food on Thursday night and watched half a documentary about deep-sea fish that Mia had specifically requested and then fallen asleep 20 minutes into, so he watched the other half alone, which was fine. That was usually fine. What was not fine, in a small and persistent way, was the continued presence of that smile in the back of his head. He texted Sophie on Friday. Normal things. She responded normally. They made vague plans for the following weekend, maybe a walk in the park, if the weather broke. Maybe Mia's current obsession with the Natural History Museum. Normal, easy, the same comfortable rhythm they'd had for years. And yet, he kept thinking about what Jenna had said at the farmer's market. She kept only the people who were genuinely hers. He kept thinking about the way Sophie had looked at him in that moment right before the smile. The almost look, the one that didn't quite land before she pulled it back. He was not a man who spent a lot of time in the territory of uncertainty. His professional life had been built on the opposite, reading situations clearly, making decisions with available information, accepting the outcome. He was not perfect at it, but he was practiced. He could sit with a problem and turn it over until it gave him something he could use. Sophie Bennett was not giving him anything he could use. She was giving him a smile he couldn't stop thinking about, and a subject change so smooth it had taken him until he was halfway home to realize she'd done it. Dre, his PA, noticed on Monday. Dre was 29, frighteningly organized, and had been working with Landon for 3 years, which meant he had developed an almost clinical ability to read Landon's moods from small signals. A slight pause before answering, the way he held his coffee cup, whether he was actually reading the documents on his desk or just looking at them. "You're distracted," Dre said, setting a stack of folders on the desk. "I'm thinking." "You're distracted," Dre repeated, pleasantly, but without modification. Landon looked up. "Is there a difference?" "When you're thinking, you look at the thing in front of you. Right now you're looking at the wall." Landon looked at the wall. He was, in fact, looking at the wall. "I'm fine," he said. "Absolutely," said Dre, in the tone of a person who had just filed something away for future reference. "Your 3 o'clock pushed to 4. Do you want the Goldman call before or after?" "Before." "Before," Dre confirmed and left. Landon looked at the wall for another moment. Then he pulled out his phone and stared at Sophie's name in his contacts and thought about all the things he hadn't said in that bakery and put the phone face down on the desk. He would figure it out. He always figured things out eventually. He just needed more information. And the problem with Sophie was that getting more information required a kind of directness that he was not entirely sure she was ready for, which meant he was sitting here trying to be patient about something he was increasingly impatient about, and that particular combination was not his most comfortable place. He talked to his friend Ray about it, eventually. Ray Okafor had been Landon's closest friend since college. They'd roomed together sophomore year, driven each other slightly insane for 9 months, and come out of it with the kind of friendship that didn't require regular maintenance to stay alive. Ray was a structural engineer, married, 2 kids, deeply practical in the way of someone who had spent his career making sure things didn't fall down. He was also, by some quality of temperament that Landon had never fully understood, entirely impossible to embarrass. They met for lunch at a place in Soho that Ray liked because it had good fish and bad lighting, which he claimed was the correct combination. Landon told him most of it. Not all of it. He wasn't sure he had all of it to tell yet, but enough. The contact purge. Jenna's offhand disclosure at the farmer's market. The bakery, the question, the smile, the subject change. Ray ate his fish and listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Landon valued most about him. When Landon finished, Ray said, "Okay, so, you've been in love with her for a while." "I didn't say that." "No, I know," Ray said. "I'm saying it." "Ray? What? Am I wrong?" Landon picked up his water glass and put it down again without drinking from it. "It's more complicated than that." "It usually feels like it is," Ray said. He didn't say it with judgment. He said it the way you say something you believe to be true. But usually when you unwrap it, it's actually pretty simple. You have feelings for her. She kept you when she cleared everyone else. And you went to the bakery specifically to say something, but then didn't say it. "I didn't have anything to say." Ray gave him a look. "I didn't know what to say," Landon amended. "That's different," Ray allowed. "She changed the subject, very smoothly. I didn't even—" He paused. "She's good at that. She does this thing where she redirects and you don't fully realize until later." "Okay, so she redirected. That could mean she's not interested and was trying to avoid it, or it could mean she's interested and was terrified." Ray shrugged. "Those are very different problems with very different solutions." "How do I know which one it is?" "You ask her." "I tried asking her." "You asked why she kept you. That's not the same as asking whether she has feelings for you." Landon looked at him. "Those are different questions," Ray said. "The first one has a lot of possible answers. The second one only has two." Landon sat with that for a moment. Around them, the restaurant hummed with lunch noise. Silverware, voices, someone near the window laughing at something. Normal Tuesday things. "I'm scared of the two answers," Landon said. "Yeah," Ray said. "That's how you know it's real." He went back to his fish. Landon stared at the table. Neither of them spoke for a while, which was the other thing Landon valued about Ray. The man understood that some silences didn't need filling. Sophie was having her own brand of difficult November. The bakery was picking up its pre-holiday pace, which meant longer hours and more elaborate orders, and the particular exhaustion of doing physically demanding work on a timeline that didn't accommodate human limitations. She was on her feet from before dawn, and by the time she got home in the evenings, she had exactly enough energy to shower, eat something that required minimal effort, and exist horizontally until sleep arrived. It was, in a way, ideal. There wasn't enough space in a day like that for the kind of thinking she was trying not to do. She had been approximately successful at this for about 2 weeks. Then Landon had walked into the bakery on a Wednesday and asked her his quiet, careful question, and she had responded with the pastry equivalent of running out of a room, the butter-to-flour ratio, and had spent the subsequent 11 days informally kicking herself about it. The thing was, she knew what she'd felt when he asked. She knew exactly. The problem was that knowing what you feel and knowing what to do with it are two entirely separate skill sets, and Sophie had developed the first one over years of quiet observation and the second one not even a little. She talked to her cousin Priya about it. Priya was 35, an immigration attorney, and one of the 8 people Sophie had kept, for reasons that had everything to do with the fact that Priya was constitutionally incapable of telling you what you wanted to hear. They were on the phone late on a Thursday, Sophie on her couch with the TV off, and the city doing its night routine outside her window. Priya, presumably at her kitchen table in Queens, eating the leftovers she made in bulk every Sunday. "He asked why you kept him," Priya said. "Yes." "And you talked about pastry." "I mentioned You talked about pastry." "Priya." "Sophie." A pause. "Why did you keep him?" "Because he's my friend." "Your friend?" Priya repeated. Not sarcastically, just letting it sit there. Sophie was quiet. "He's my best friend," she said. And even as she said it, she could hear how that sounded. The way best friends sometimes functioned as a place to put something when you didn't have better words for it, or when the words you had were too heavy to pick up. "Okay," Priya said. "Let me ask you something else. When something good happens to you, like actually good, a great day at work, something you're genuinely proud of,
Who's the first person you want to tell? Sophie didn't answer. Hmm? Priya said. That doesn't prove. I didn't say it proves anything. I'm asking a question. Sophie looked at the dark TV screen. Outside, a siren went by, the particular Doppler pitch of New York at night. She'd lived in this city long enough that she didn't hear it most of the time. Tonight she heard it. Landon, she said quietly. He's the first person I want to tell. And when something goes wrong, she didn't answer that one either. Right, Priya said. It's complicated, Sophie said. He has a lot going on. He's raising Mia alone. He runs this whole company. He doesn't need me dropping something like this on him when he's just being a good friend. What if it ruins everything? What if I say it and it's not? What if it's just me and I misread it, and then we can't go back? All of that is possible, Priya said. That's not comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to be accurate. Another pause. But here's what's also possible. He walked into your bakery specifically to ask you something he didn't get from Jenna or anyone else. He showed up, and the question he asked wasn't casual, Sophie. He wasn't making conversation. He wanted to know. Sophie pressed her palm flat against the cushion of the couch. Cold fabric, solid, real. I got so scared, she admitted. Quietly, like it was harder to say out loud than she'd expected. I know, Priya said. The last time I thought something was solid, I know. Marcus wasn't. She stopped. She didn't want to talk about Marcus. She was tired of having Marcus occupy any portion of her thinking. It's just, Landon is the one person I kept. The one. And if I get that wrong, I don't have a contingency. There's no backup. He's too important. Yeah, Priya said. That's usually how you know. There was a particular quality to the silence that followed. Not empty, but full of things neither of them needed to say. What do I do? Sophie said finally. Nothing yet, Priya said. You don't have to do anything yet. Just stop pretending you don't know what you feel. That's the first step. The rest figures itself out. Sophie didn't entirely believe that. The rest had a way of not figuring itself out without some degree of intervention. But she took the first part, stop pretending, and held it. She was already bad at pretending. She'd just been doing it anyway. December brought the snow early. Not the pretty kind. Not the postcard silent snowfall that made the city look like something from a dream. The first snow of that year was slushy and gray and turned the sidewalks into an obstacle course, and everyone in Manhattan walked with the particular irritated posture of people who had known the snow was coming and were still somehow annoyed by it. Sophie worked through a Saturday morning rush that left her standing at the counter for 4 hours without a break. Holiday orders had ramped up. Elaborate layer cakes, custom pastry boxes. The kind of work that was satisfying in the way hard physical labor was satisfying but left you too tired to feel much of anything by the time it was done. She was doing inventory in the back at around 2 in the afternoon when Celine appeared in the doorway. There's someone out front for you, she said. I'm in the middle of... It's Landon. Sophie looked up from the clipboard. Celine looked back at her with an expression that communicated several things without words. Primarily, I have eyes. I've been running this kitchen for 15 years, and I know what it looks like when a man drives across town in December slush for someone he describes as just a friend. Sophie put the clipboard down. He was at the corner table, the same one as before, with his coat still on and melting snow at the edges of his hair. He had a coffee. Celine had gotten him something without being asked, apparently, and he was sitting very still in the way he sat when he was thinking about something seriously. Sophie came out from the back and he looked up and something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, just shifted. You didn't text, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. I know. I was in the neighborhood. She looked at him the same way she'd looked at him the last time he'd said that. Right, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. Okay. I wasn't in the neighborhood. No. I needed to see you. Sophie kept her face as neutral as she could manage, which was not very neutral. Her face had never been her strong suit in terms of concealment. You could have called. I know. I wanted to come. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, and she noticed he was doing the same thing she did when she needed warmth more than caffeine, holding it rather than drinking it. Something about that detail settled in her chest. I've been thinking about something and I can't stop thinking about it, and I thought if I kept it to myself for another 2 weeks, I was going to lose my mind, so, Sophie said. So I'm here. She waited. He looked at the table for a moment, then up at her. There was something in his expression that she didn't entirely recognize, not because it was foreign, but because she'd never seen it turned on her quite so directly. Landon was a contained person, not cold, but measured. Someone who put things where he wanted them and rarely let you see the effort of it. Right now, he looked like a man who had put something down and had no intention of picking it back up. I talked to Ray, he said. How is Ray? Sophie. She stopped. I know I asked you something last time, he said, and you moved on, and I let you. That was my call. He paused. I'm not letting it go this time. The bakery was quiet around them. Celine had disappeared into the back with the particular discretion of a woman who understood when to make herself scarce. 2 customers at the other end of the room were absorbed in their laptops.
Outside the window, the gray snow was doing its gray thing. Why did you keep me? He said. His voice was even, not pressuring, but it was also not a question he was prepared to let her redirect. Sophie looked at the table. Landon, I'm not trying to make this hard, he said. I'm not trying to back you into anything. I need to know. Because I've been carrying something around for a while and I can't figure out what to do with it without knowing where you stand first. Her head came up. What does that mean? It means what it means. She looked at him. And this time she didn't look away. The thing about Landon, the thing that had been true since that first dinner party 4 years ago, was that he had always seen her clearly. Not the version of herself she performed for different audiences. Not the competent professional or the easy conversationalist or the person who had it more together than she actually did. He looked at her the same way every time, and what was in the look was, you, specifically, as you actually are. Nobody else had ever made her feel quite that visible. Nobody else had ever made visible feel like safety rather than exposure. She had kept his number at 2 a.m. on a kitchen floor because deep down, in some part of herself she hadn't wanted to examine directly, she had known it was the most honest thing she'd done in 3 years. She had kept him because he was the one relationship in her life that felt like a choice she had made with her whole self. Not the self that was trying to be okay or trying to be loved or trying to be enough. The actual self. The one that was tired and sometimes bad at things and made cakes at 11 p.m. that turned out wrong and wasn't always sure she was heading anywhere worth heading. He had chosen that person, over and over, without making a production of it. She had known that for a long time. She had been terrified of it for almost as long. Because you're the only person, she said, and her voice came out quieter than she'd intended, who has ever made me feel like being exactly who I am is enough. Not like you're doing me a favor, just you never looked at me like I was a project or a problem or something that needed fixing. She paused. You just looked at me like I was Sophie. Landon was very still. And I kept you because when I went through all those names, she continued, when I really looked at all of them and tried to figure out which ones were real, you were the obvious answer. You were so obvious it almost scared me. The quiet between them was different now. It had weight to it. Almost, he said. She exhaled a short, half-broken laugh. Okay, it did scare me. Present tense. Why? Because I don't have a backup, Landon. She pressed her palms flat on the table. If I'm wrong about this, if I say whatever I'm about to say, and it goes wrong, I don't have a contingency. You're not a person I can afford to lose. He looked at her for a long moment. Say whatever you're about to say, he said. You don't know what it is. I have a pretty good idea what it is. And that doesn't scare you? Something crossed his face, not the easy reassurance she might have expected, not a smooth answer. Just the honest thing, which was that yes, it probably did scare him, and he was here anyway. I've been scared of it for 2 years, he said. I decided I'd rather be scared and honest than comfortable and full of it. Sophie looked at him. She thought about the kitchen floor, the contact list, the name she couldn't delete. She thought about every good thing that had happened in the last 4 years that she'd wanted to tell him first. Every bad thing she'd gotten through more easily because he was on the other end of a phone. Every Sunday morning in his kitchen, every stupid meme thread, every conversation that had lasted 2 hours longer than either of them planned, because neither of them had wanted to stop. She thought about Mia saying that seems like a waste with the devastating clarity that only children managed. I think I've had feelings for you for a long time, she said. Not easily, not cleanly, like something being said out loud for the first time after a long time of being said only in the privacy of her own chest. And I'm terrified of that. I'm not someone who's been sitting here confident about this. I've been a mess about it. But I think it's you. I think it's been you for a while. The words sat there between them on that small corner table in the quiet bakery, in the December gray, with the city making its noise outside the window. Landon reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not dramatically, not with any particular declaration. He just put his hand over hers, and she felt every one of her heartbeats with an unusual amount of clarity, and neither of them said anything for a moment, and that was fine. Some things didn't need immediate narrating. Okay, he said. Okay? She repeated. Okay. He didn't move his hand. I've wanted to tell you something for about 2 years, and I kept not doing it because I was doing this. He gestured with his free hand, a gesture that somehow communicated the whole thing, all of it, the overthinking and the not saying it and the pretending it was fine, and I'm done doing that. What did you want to tell me? That I think about you more than anyone else, that you're the first person I want to call, that I have been calling what we have friendship because that's the word I had, but I don't think it's been just friendship for a long time. Not for me. She looked at him. And I know we're standing at something, and it could go either way, he continued. And I know what's at stake for both of us, and I'm not asking for anything tonight except for you to know that it's real. What I feel. It's real, and it's been real for a while, and I thought you should know. Sophie's eyes were doing something she was going to be mildly mortified about, but not enough to look away. You drove across town in slush, she said. I did. For this. For this. She laughed then, a small, unsteady thing, with more relief in it than humor. Her hand turned over under his, and her fingers linked with his, not tentatively, but the way you hold something when you don't want it to go anywhere. You could have called, she said. I wanted to see your face. She looked at him. He looked back. Outside, the slush kept doing what slush does. Inside, nothing was exactly resolved, and several things were more complicated than they'd been this morning, and both of them knew it. But something had been said out loud. Something that had lived in the space between them for a long time had been given its actual shape. It was a beginning. Landon didn't let go of her hand. She didn't let go of his. And they sat there in the quiet of the bakery while December happened outside, both of them carrying something that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it was going somewhere real. They didn't kiss that night. Landon held her hand across the small bakery table until the light outside the window had gone from gray to dark. And then Sophie had a closing shift to finish, and he had a daughter at home with a babysitter who charged by the hour. And so they'd stood up and put on their coats and walked to the door together, the way they'd done 100 times before, except that nothing about it felt the same as any of those 100 times. He'd paused at the door. She'd paused with him. So, she said. So, he said. They looked at each other in the particular way of two people who have just said something irreversible and are still taking stock of the territory they've walked into. I don't know exactly what this is yet, Sophie said. Carefully. Not pulling back. He could feel the difference, but honest in the way she was always honest when she wasn't scared enough to be otherwise. I know what I said. I meant it. I don't want to rush into something and have it become a thing before we've figured out what the thing is. That's fair, Landon said. You're not... She studied his face. You're not offended? No? And he meant it. He had spent 2 years not rushing. A little longer wasn't going to break him. I'd rather do this right than do it fast. She exhaled, and in the exhale was something that looked like relief, which told him that she'd been holding that breath since before she said it. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He stepped out into the cold. The slush had frozen over in the time they'd been sitting inside, turning the sidewalk into something requiring careful navigation. He made it half a block before his phone buzzed. "Sophie, drive safe." The sidewalk in front of the bakery is a liability lawsuit waiting to happen. He stood in the frozen dark and smiled at his phone like an absolute fool. "Landon. Noted. I'll send you the medical bills." "Sophie, I have a croissant budget, not a medical bill budget. Please be careful." He put the phone in his pocket and kept walking, and the cold didn't feel like the same cold it had been an hour ago. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of his recent life, which was saying something given that his recent life had included a 7-year-old informing him that she'd decided penguins were probably the most emotionally intelligent animal, and could they get one? He and Sophie were something. Not yet what they'd admitted to each other, but no longer what they'd been before. The text threads continued. The weekend plans continued. But underneath all of it now was a current that hadn't been there before, or rather, had been there, but unnamed. Naming it had changed the weight of everything. He noticed it in small ways. The way a conversation could suddenly develop a charge from nowhere, two people talking about nothing important, and then a pause that lasted a beat too long. And in that beat, everything said and unsaid pressing against the surface of the moment. The way she'd started doing this thing where she'd look at him and then look away a half-second faster than she used to, and he recognized it because he'd been doing the same thing for 2 years. What they hadn't done was talk about the actual shape of it, where it was going, what they both wanted. Those questions sat at the edge of every interaction like patient strangers waiting for an invitation in. Landon wasn't sure who was supposed to open that door, or when. He had told her he'd rather do it right than fast, and he'd meant it, but he was also not a patient man by nature. He'd become a patient man through practice and considerable effort, the way some people became runners. Not because it came naturally, but because they'd decided the alternative was worse. He kept the patience. He also kept a running count, which he'd never have admitted to anyone, of the days since the bakery. Mia noticed something was different before he told her anything. She was 7, but she had her father's eyes in the observational sense, the particular quality of attention that registered details and filed them without announcing itself. She'd picked it up somewhere in the years of being a kid who paid close attention to the adults around her, the way children do when they're trying to make sense of a world that doesn't explain itself. They were at breakfast on a Saturday morning, 12 days after the bakery, when she looked up from her cereal and said, "Are you happy?" Landon looked up from his coffee. "What?" "You seem like you're in a good mood, like different than normal." "I'm always in a good mood." She gave him a look that was so specifically Sophie's look, that flat, unimpressed, "I know what you're doing" look, that it almost startled him. Mia had never met Sophie long enough to pick it up consciously. Maybe some expressions were just universal. "You're on your phone more," Mia said. "You're smiling at it." "I'm not." He stopped. He was, in fact, on his phone more. And he was, in fact, occasionally smiling at it. "I'm just busy." "With Sophie?" He set the coffee down. "Why would you say Sophie?" "Because you always text her." She said this very matter-of-factly, spooning up cereal. "And she texts back fast. I've seen it." Landon was having the experience, not for the first time, of being more thoroughly interrogated by a second grader than by most adults. "Sophie and I are friends," he said. "Good friends. You know that." Mia considered this with the particular seriousness she brought to most things. "Do you like her like more than a friend?" "Mia, I'm asking." "I can see that." She waited. She was remarkably good at waiting for a 7-year-old. He'd always suspected she'd gotten that from her mother, who could outwait anyone in a conversation. "Things are complicated," he said finally, which was something he'd promised himself he'd never say to her because it was the kind of answer that communicated nothing except that the adult didn't want to talk about it. "We're figuring some things out." Mia nodded slowly, processing. "But you like her." He looked at his daughter for a moment. her cereal spoon suspended, her expression somewhere between curious and genuinely invested, the way she looked when she was trying to understand something she thought mattered. "Yeah," he said, "I like her." The smile that broke across Mia's face was so sudden and complete that it was almost alarming. She went back to her cereal immediately, like she'd gotten her answer and filed it, and moved on. But the smile stayed, and he saw it, and something in his chest did a thing that was hard to name. "Good," she said to her cereal. "I think she's really cool." "You've mentioned," Landon said, "she should come over for dinner again. Maybe. Maybe soon. Eat your cereal, Mia." She ate her cereal. The smile didn't fully go away. Akwag. Sophie was doing her own version of not rushing, which mostly looked like being in a constant internal argument with herself at odd hours of the night. The argument had two sides. Side one, she knew what she felt, she'd said it out loud. Landon had said his version back. This was a real thing that deserved to be treated like a real thing. Side two, she had been wrong about real things before. She had believed in something solid and watched it turn out to be nothing. She had spent 3 years building a life beside someone and walked away from it with the hollow, specific feeling of a person who hadn't really known the person they were with. She was aware these two things were not the same situation. She was aware Landon was not Marcus. She didn't need that spelled out. The ways in which they were different were numerous and obvious, and she'd been cataloging them, partly without meaning to, for 4 years. Marcus had looked at her the way people look at something they've stopped really seeing, with a kind of absent familiarity, the way you stop seeing the painting on the wall because it's been there too long. Landon looked at her like she was something worth paying attention to, and not in a way that felt like performance. She had learned to tell the difference. But the scar tissue from a long ending didn't care about logic. It just made everything tender. Made her second-guess her own instincts. Not because her instincts were wrong, but because they'd failed to protect her before, and she hadn't forgiven herself for not seeing it sooner. She was talking to Priya about this one night. Both of them on the phone, Priya eating chips, Sophie in her kitchen attempting and abandoning a cup of tea that was now cold, when Priya said something that stopped her. "You keep talking about being afraid of getting it wrong," Priya said. "But can I point out that you've actually already done the hard part?" "What do you mean?" "You've been choosing him for 4 years, Sophie, without a label, without a guarantee, without knowing he felt the same way. You chose to trust him with your actual self. Not the version of you that was performing okay, but the real one. You did that over and over." A pause, the rustle of the chip bag. "That's the terrifying part. That's already done. The rest is just saying it out loud, which you already did." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "You're annoyingly good at this," she said. "I know. I'm also right." "You're also right," Sophie admitted. "I'm aware." She went to sleep that night with something slightly looser in her chest than had been there in the weeks before. Not fully open. She didn't think she was fully open yet. Didn't think she'd get there before something had happened that made it feel safe. But loosened. The way a knot loosens before it comes undone. The something that happened was a Tuesday. It was the 3rd week of December, and the city had the particular energy that December in New York develops when the holidays are close enough to feel, but not so close that the stress has eclipsed the charm. The storefronts along Sophie's block in the village were lit up in a way that looked genuinely pretty rather than commercial, which was a narrow window of time that Sophie always tried to notice before it passed. She was walking home from the subway after a long shift, coat up against the cold, her bag over one shoulder with the weight of a day in it. She was thinking about nothing in particular, the exhausted static of someone who has stood on their feet for 9 hours and run out of specific thoughts somewhere around hour 7. Her phone rang. It was Landon. She almost didn't pick up. Not because she didn't want to talk to him, she always wanted to talk to him. That was the whole problem and also the whole point. But because she was tired and cold and not sure she could be a fully functional human being in a conversation right now. She picked up. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He sounded off, just slightly. A note that wasn't quite right. "You off work?" "Just left. Walking home." "What's up?" A pause. Short, but there. "Nothing. Another pause. "I had a weird day." Sophie adjusted the bag on her shoulder. Tell me about it. No, you sound tired. It can wait. Landon, tell me. He did. The logistics company acquisition his CFO had been pushing, the one he'd had mixed feelings about for reasons he couldn't articulate, had hit a wall. Not a deal breaker, but a complication that required unwinding a piece of the structure they'd spent 2 months building, and the COO had a strong opinion about how to unwind it that Landon didn't fully agree with but couldn't definitively counter. And he'd been sitting with that particular brand of professional discomfort all afternoon. The kind where you know something is wrong, but you can't point to exactly what, and everyone around you is moving fast and you're the one who needs to say slow down, but you can't explain precisely why. He talked for a while. She walked and listened. She asked one question about the specific piece of the structure that was complicating things, not because she was a business person or understood the full context, but because she was interested and she'd been listening carefully. And he answered it, and in the process of answering it out loud, he paused and said, "Wait. What?" "That's it. That's the thing I couldn't name." He went quiet for a moment, the particular quality of quiet that meant he was thinking hard. The liability sits on the wrong side of the acquisition. If the structure stays as is, we're holding exposure that should belong to the seller, and everyone's been looking at the revenue numbers and not at where the liability lands. "I have no idea what any of that means," Sophie said. "It means I was right to feel wrong about it, and now I know why." He exhaled. She could hear the difference, the specific sound of someone releasing something they'd been carrying. "Sorry, I know that made no sense." "You figured it out," she said. "I figured it out." "Good. I figured it out by talking to you." "You figured it out by talking," she corrected. "I was just here." "Sophie," his voice had shifted, lower, more direct. "You were not just here. You never are." She stopped walking. She was standing on the corner of her block, the cold doing its work, the lit-up storefronts throwing orange and white light across the pavement, and she had stopped because something in his voice had landed in the middle of her chest, and she needed to be still for a second to let it be there. "Landon," she said. "I know," he said. "I know what I said about not rushing. I'm not trying to rush, I just—" He stopped, started again. "Can I come over?" She looked at the lit-up window of the apartment building across the street for a moment. "I'm a mess," she said. 9 hours in a kitchen. I don't care. I literally have flowers somewhere, still, on my— "Sophie, can I come over?" She was quiet for a beat. "Yeah," she said. "Come over." He arrived 40 minutes later, which was how long it took to get across the city in December traffic. And in that 40 minutes, Sophie had showered, eaten a handful of crackers because she'd forgotten to eat dinner, and had a rapid-fire internal debate about what this was and what she wanted it to be, and arrived at no clean conclusions, which felt about right. She buzzed him up. He knocked. She opened the door, and he was standing there in his coat with his hands in his pockets, and she thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than she had before, as if something in her had stopped arguing and started just looking, that he was one of the few people she'd ever met who made presence feel like something. Not presence in the showy sense, just when he was in a room, the room felt different, occupied in a specific way that it wasn't before. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. "Come in." Her apartment was small. It was the kind of small that required certain lifestyle adaptations. The dining table that doubled as a desk, the bookshelf that also held her kitchen overflow because the kitchen had run out of space, the couch positioned so specifically that moving it more than 6 inches in any direction created a problem. She had made it hers through a particular density of small things, plants that were mostly surviving, a print above the couch she'd bought at a street fair, a ridiculous ceramic fruit bowl shaped like a fish that had been a gift from Jenna and that she pretended to be mildly embarrassed by and loved completely. Landon had been here enough times that he didn't look around like a person taking in new information. He looked around like someone who was familiar with a place and still liked being in it. He sat on the couch. She went to the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water because it was late, and she was not willing to pretend she was someone who had wine ready at 9:30 on a weeknight, like a person who had their life together. "Water," she said, handing him a glass. "Perfect," he said, and meant it in a way that made her not feel embarrassed about the water. She sat beside him on the couch, not at the other end, not so close that it was a statement, but not far enough that there was meaningful space between them. The natural middle ground of two people who had been in each other's orbit for 4 years and no longer felt the need to negotiate the geometry of a shared couch. "Okay," she said. "What was the actual weird day about? Not the acquisition? The real thing." He looked at her sideways. "What makes you think there's a real thing separate from the acquisition?" "Because you called me to talk about the acquisition, and you never call when you're just stressed about work. You handle work stress alone. You call me when something underneath it is bothering you, and the work gives you something to talk about while you figure out what the underneath thing is." He was quiet for a moment. "That's very accurate," he said. "I've had 4 years to pay attention." He looked at the water glass in his hands. "Mia said something this morning about you." Sophie waited. "She asked if I liked you as more than a friend." He said it evenly. "I told her things were complicated, which was a cop-out, and she knew it, so then I told her yes." "What did she say?" "She said good." Something moved across his face. Something warm and not quite comfortable, the way something warm rarely is when it matters. "She said you were cool and that you should come for dinner." And then she went back to her cereal like she'd just filed a routine report. Sophie felt the smile before she could do anything about it. "She's something else. She likes you." "I like her." "I know you do." He paused. "Sophie, she doesn't warm up to people like that. She's friendly, she's fine with people, but she doesn't actually let people in. She gets that from me, which I'm only mildly proud of." He finally looked up from the glass. "She lets you in, every time, without any effort on your part. She just decided you were safe, and she's been operating on that since pretty much the first time you met." Sophie understood, not for the first time, that Mia was not a small thing in this conversation, that what Landon was telling her was layered, not just about a 7-year-old who liked her, but about what that 7-year-old's judgment meant to him, about what it meant to be a person who had been raising his daughter alone for 4 years and was now talking about something that would affect not just his life, but hers. "She's important," Sophie said. "She's everything," he said quietly. "I know." She put her water glass on the coffee table, turned to look at him. "Landon, I want you to know that I understand what this means, what it would mean. She's not a complication to me. She's part of this. She's part of why—" She stopped, tried to find the right way in. "She's part of why you are who you are. And who you are is the whole reason we're sitting here." He looked at her for a long moment. "What are we doing?" he said. Not helplessly, just asking, the way you ask when you genuinely want the answer and trust the person to give it to you. "I think we're sitting in the part right before something," Sophie said, "where everything is still uncertain, but you've already decided to walk toward it anyway. Have you decided that?" "I'm sitting here at 9:30 on a weeknight with flour probably still somewhere on my person. What do you think?" He laughed. It was the real laugh, the one that didn't happen as often as she'd have liked, the one that came from somewhere genuine and made him look younger by about 5 years. "You look fine," he said. "You can't even tell in this light." "I could tell, and I'd still think you looked fine." She looked at him. The lamplight in her small apartment was the kind of warm that made everything look softer than it maybe was, and she was aware of that, but she also thought there was something real in what she was seeing. A man who had driven across the city in December, slush 3 weeks ago, because he needed to say something to her face, who was now sitting on her couch at 9:30 at night because a weird day had made him want to be where she was. She had spent years being overlooked, not cruelly, just not seen. The way you can coexist with someone and have them never actually look at you. She had learned to move through that invisible, taking up as little space as possible, trying not to want more than was being offered. Landon had never once made her feel invisible. 4 years. Not once. "Okay," she said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I've decided." She looked at him directly. "I'm walking toward it." Something in his expression went very still, the way it did when he was feeling something he hadn't planned for. "Yeah?" he said. "Yeah." She held his gaze. I'm still scared. That doesn't go away. I'm not going to pretend I'm not, because you know me well enough to know I'd be lying. I know. But I'm more scared of the alternative, she said, of being in my kitchen at 2 a.m. 10 years from now and thinking about the conversation I didn't finish on a December Tuesday because I was too careful. He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically, just covered it with his, the way he'd done in the bakery, like it was a natural thing that had always been possible, and they'd just needed to get here. I don't want to be anyone's risk management, he said. I don't want you to choose me because you calculated the odds. I want you to choose me because you want to. I want to, she said, simply. He looked at her for a moment. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was not a perfect first kiss. Her nose bumped slightly against his cheek, and she made a small sound that was halfway between embarrassed and amused. And he pulled back a little, and they were both looking at each other from very close range, and the situation was undeniably slightly awkward, and also somehow exactly right. Sorry, she said. Don't be. I'm out of practice. Me too. He was smiling. Up close, the smile was different, less guarded than the version he showed the rest of the world, more like the thing underneath it. We can be bad at this together. Terrible idea, she said. I've had a few. She kissed him again. It went better this time. Not because it became something out of a movie. It didn't. It was still a little awkward, both of them slightly unsure of the geometry in the lamplight of her small apartment, but because they were both present for it, both aware of the weight of it, both not pretending it was smaller than it was. When they pulled apart, they stayed close, her forehead resting against his temple, neither of them speaking for a moment. 4 years, she said. I know. That's a long time. It is. We're idiots. He laughed, the real laugh again. She felt it more than heard it from this close. Yeah, he said. We kind of are. She sat back a little, but didn't move far. Didn't particularly want to. He kept her hand and she let him. Outside, the city was doing the thing it always did. Indifferent, loud, enormous, moving. Inside her small apartment with its ridiculous fish fruit bowl and its mostly surviving plants held something that felt new, and also, somehow, like it had been here for a while, waiting for them to find it. She should have felt terrified. She was, a little. The scar tissue wasn't gone just because she'd made a decision. Fear and decision existed in the same place sometimes, and that was just the reality of being a person who had been hurt before and was still choosing to move anyway. But she was also, and this was the thing she hadn't expected, the thing that kept catching her off guard, steady. There was a steadiness under all of it that she hadn't felt in years, the kind that didn't come from certainty about outcomes, but from certainty about the person sitting next to you. She was certain about him. She had been, she realized, for a long time. Stay a little, she said. Yeah, he said. I'll stay a little. They talked until midnight. Nothing important, the way the best conversations often aren't important in their subject matter, but are important in everything else. Mia's latest penguin research, a pastry technique Sophie was trying to work out, a book he'd started and wasn't sure about. Small things, real things, the ordinary texture of two people who knew each other well enough that silence wasn't awkward and laughter came easy. At some point, his hand was around her shoulders and her feet were tucked up on the couch beside her, and neither of them had made a declaration about how that had happened. It had just happened, the way things do when the decision beneath them has already been made. He left at midnight because Mia would be up early, and he didn't want to deal with the look Dre would give him if he came in running on no sleep. At the door, he kissed her once more. Better this time, both of them more comfortable with the coordinates of each other, and then stepped back and looked at her in the way he'd looked at her across that corner table and in the bakery doorway, and in 100 small moments she was now realizing she'd been half noticing for years. Good night, Sophie, he said. Good night, Landon. She closed the door, stood with her back against it for a moment in the quiet of her apartment. Then she picked up her phone and texted Priya. You were right. Don't make a thing of it. 3 seconds later, I knew it. I'm making a thing of it. Sophie smiled at her phone and went to bed. She didn't sleep for a while, but not because anything was wrong. For the first time in a long time, it was because things were very specifically right, and she wasn't ready to stop being awake inside of that. Priya did, in fact, make a thing of it. She showed up at Sophie's apartment 2 days later with a bottle of wine and the energy of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment for considerably longer than Sophie had been living inside it. She sat on the couch with her legs crossed and her wine glass tilted at a comfortable angle and said, "Tell me everything," with the particular relish of a person who had been right about something important and intended to be present for every detail of the confirmation. Sophie told her most of it. The bakery in December slush, the hand across the table, coming home that Tuesday night, the slightly awkward first kiss and the part where it got better. Priya listened with the focused attention of someone who was cataloging for future reference. "The nose bump," she said when Sophie got to that part. It was brief." "I love that," Priya was smiling. "That's so much better than if it had been perfect." "It was not my finest moment. It's a real moment. Perfect first kisses are for people who aren't actually feeling anything." She sipped her wine. "If you're nervous enough to bump noses, you care. That's the whole point." Sophie looked at her. "When did you become a romantic?" "I've always been a romantic. I'm also a realist. Those things coexist." Priya set her glass down. "So what now? What are you two actually doing?" "We're figuring it out." Figuring it out meaning we're talking more. Seeing each other, not putting a label on it yet because neither of us wants to rush and make it into a thing before it knows what it is. Priya nodded slowly. "That's mature." "Don't sound surprised." "I'm not surprised, I'm just noting it." She picked her glass back up. "And you're not scared?" "I'm scared constantly," Sophie said. "I've just decided to be scared and do it anyway, which is apparently what adults are supposed to do." "It is," Priya said. "Nobody tells you that part." They finished the wine and ordered food and talked about other things too. Priya's caseload, Jenna's latest plan to become a yoga instructor with a lifestyle brand, the fact that their cousin Marcus on their father's side had gotten engaged to a woman no one in the family had met yet, which Priya had opinions about. Normal things. The ordinary business of two people who had known each other long enough that not every conversation needed to be weighted. But when Priya left that night, hugging Sophie at the door, she held on a beat longer than usual. "You deserve this," she said quietly, not in the performative way people said it, but in the way of someone stating a thing they considered to be factually true. Sophie held on back. "Don't make me cry," Sophie said. "I just did my face." "You did not do your face. You look like someone who stayed up until midnight and is operating on leftover happiness." "That's oddly accurate." "I know." Priya pulled back, straightened Sophie's collar in a gesture so sisterly it made something ache. "Be happy, Sophie. Let yourself." Sophie stood in the doorway after she left and thought about letting herself. It was, she was discovering, harder than it sounded. The thing about beginning something real after a long time of not having it was that the beginning contained both the lightness and the accumulated weight of everything before it. It wasn't clean. It didn't start fresh the way the word beginning implied. It started in the middle of two full lives, with histories attached and fears trailing behind and the specific texture of two people who knew each other well enough to have opinions about each other's habits. Landon, Sophie learned, was constitutionally incapable of leaving cabinet doors fully closed. She'd been to his apartment dozens of times and had never noticed, but now that she was there with different attention, she noticed. Every cabinet in his kitchen slightly ajar. Every time. He learned that she stress cleaned. When something was bothering her, her apartment became incrementally more organized. He'd come over one evening after she'd had a difficult conversation with her bakery's management about her hours and found her kitchen cupboards rearranged. "Your mugs are by size now," he said, looking at them. "They were in the wrong order before." "There's a right order for mugs." Obviously. She was doing something at the counter that didn't need doing. He could tell. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Sophie," she turned around. There was a pause that was not long enough to be dramatic, but was long enough to contain something. "They want to change my hours," she said. "The new shift they're talking about doesn't work with anything, and Celine can't override it because it's coming from the ownership, and she's as frustrated as I am." She exhaled. I've been there 6 years. 6. And now some new operations manager who's been here 4 months is restructuring the schedule, and nobody consulted anyone who actually makes the food. Can you push back? I already did. Professionally, thoroughly. They said they'd take it under consideration, which means they've noted my objection and will proceed anyway. He leaned against the counter and looked at her. What do you want to do? Not what are your options or have you thought about? Just what do you want? She stopped rearranging the imaginary mess on the counter. I want to open my own place, she said. And then, immediately, the thing people do when they've said something they've been keeping to themselves for too long, the reflexive pullback. Which is insane. I know, the capital required alone it's not insane. Landon, I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying it's not insane. He folded his arms, looking at her with the particular quality of attention he gave things he was taking seriously. How long have you wanted that? She looked at the counter. Years. Years. It's not realistic, not right now, maybe not ever. The industry has a brutal margin and I don't have... Stop. His voice was even. I didn't ask if it was realistic. I asked how long you've wanted it. She was quiet for a moment. Since I was 24, she said. I had this picture in my head of a specific kind of place. Not a big restaurant, something small, neighborhood. The kind of place that's just there. Where people come because it's theirs, not because it got written up somewhere, she shrugged, the particular small shrug of someone downplaying something they actually care about deeply. It's just an idea. It's a good idea, he said. You don't know anything about bakeries. I know when someone talks about something the way you just talked about that. He looked at her steadily. That's not just an idea, Sophie. That's the thing you actually want. She looked at him. The thing she was learning about being with Landon, really being with him, past the friendship and into this new territory, was that all the qualities she'd valued in him as a friend became more complicated now, more present. She'd always known he paid attention. She'd always known he took her seriously. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it in the specific moment when it turned fully towards something she'd never said out loud to another person, those were different things. I can't talk about this right now, she said, not evasively, just genuinely overwhelmed by the proximity of the conversation to something she'd been protecting. Can we just order food and watch something terrible? Yeah, he said, without any indication that he felt dismissed. What do you want? Anything that requires no decisions from me. I'll handle it. He handled it. They ate on her couch and watched half a nature documentary, and she fell asleep before the end, which she was going to be embarrassed about later, and he covered her with the blanket from the back of the couch and let himself out quietly, and texted her when he was home, per their ongoing arrangement. She woke up at 2 a.m. to still think it's a good idea, sleep well. She held her phone in the dark and thought about a woman who wanted to open a small bakery that felt like it belonged to the neighborhood. She thought about it for a while before she went back to sleep. Christmas that year was the first one in 4 years that Sophie spent without the shape of a relationship organizing it. She had Jenna for Christmas Eve. Her parents were in Florida now, retired and somewhat baffled by the choices their daughters had made in moving to New York, but supportive in the way parents were supportive when they didn't entirely understand. And Priya's family chaos for Christmas Day, which was a full-contact event involving 14 people in a Queens row house and enough food to constitute a genuine hazard. She was good. She was genuinely good. The absence of Marcus was not the wound she might have expected, or rather, it had been, weeks ago. But it had healed faster than she'd anticipated, which told her something about the nature of what she'd lost. You didn't miss a specific person, she was learning. You missed what you'd hoped they would be. And when the hope had been fading for months before the ending, there was less to miss on the other side. What she noticed at Christmas was different. She noticed it on Christmas Eve, sitting with Jenna eating Thai food and watching bad television, when Jenna said something funny, and Sophie's first instinct was to text it to Landon. She noticed it on Christmas morning when she opened the card that had arrived 3 days earlier. Actual card. Actual handwriting, the old-fashioned kind, with a short note that read, "Mia picked this out for you. She had opinions. Merry Christmas, Sophie. L. The gift inside was a small ceramic elephant, vividly painted, that had clearly been selected by a 7-year-old operating on absolute conviction. She put it on the shelf next to the fish fruit bowl. She texted Landon a photo of them side by side. He responded within 30 seconds. Mia is very proud. She says the elephant's name is Gerald. Gerald is perfect, Sophie typed back. She wants to know if you're free for New Year's. Sophie looked at that for a moment. Then, is that a Mia question or a you question? A pause. Longer than his usual response time. Both. She smiled at her phone in the empty kitchen, the tree lights from Jenna's living room throwing colored shadows across the tile. Yes, she sent. I'm free. New Year's Eve was not what she expected, which turned out to be the best thing about it. She had assumed, some part of her had assembled a picture without being asked, that it would be something particular. The Billionaire's version of New Year's. Some event, some gathering, something with the scale that his life sometimes had. She hadn't fully thought it through, but there was an image there somewhere, assembled from the basic information of who he was. What actually happened was this. She arrived at his apartment at 7 with a bottle of Prosecco she'd been talked into by the wine shop owner on her block. And she found Mia in pajamas at 7 p.m. because Mia had decided that New Year's called for pajamas immediately after dinner, and Landon in the kitchen attempting nachos with the focused expression of a man who was good at many things and was very aware that cooking was not reliably among them. "You're here," Mia announced from the couch, with the casual confidence of someone who had been expecting this and considered it appropriately arranged. "I'm here," Sophie confirmed. She looked at the kitchen, where something was definitely going slightly wrong with the cheese distribution. "Should I?" "Please," Landon said, without turning around. She set down the Prosecco and went into the kitchen. "What are you trying to do?" she said. "Nachos. It seems simple." "It is simple. It's not as simple as it looks." She looked at the situation on the baking sheet. "You put the cheese on last. The cheese goes on top. The cheese goes in layers. Otherwise, the bottom chips don't get any and the top chips drown." She moved him gently aside, the way you moved someone who was trying their best and slightly in the way, and rebuilt the situation with an efficiency born from years of working with food. "Do you have any jalapenos?" "Mia doesn't like jalapenos." "Mia gets her own section without jalapenos. Do you have them?" "Possibly." She found them in the back of the refrigerator, behind a container of leftover something and an apple that had seen better days. "The apple," she said. "I know." "Landon." "I know." She threw out the apple without further discussion. He watched her move around his kitchen with an expression she caught in her peripheral vision, something fond and a little bit wondering, the way you looked at something you were still adjusting to having. The nachos were good. Mia declared them the best nachos she had ever consumed, which Sophie suspected was an exaggeration, but accepted graciously. They ate on the living room floor because Mia had decided floor eating was more festive, which was not a logic Sophie could argue with, and watched 3 episodes of a nature show about ocean creatures, which Mia provided commentary on with the authority of someone who had been researching this field for approximately her entire life. At 9:30, Mia was visibly struggling against sleep with the grim determination of someone who had declared they would make midnight and was beginning to understand they had overestimated themselves. "You can sleep," Landon told her. "I'm not sleeping," she said, and then blinked extremely slowly. "You were asleep for a second." "I was resting my eyes." Both of them, for about 30 seconds. Mia looked at Sophie for arbitration. "I'm staying out of this," Sophie said. At 9:45, Mia was asleep against the couch cushions with the total commitment of someone who had stopped fighting it. Landon carried her to her room with the practiced ease of someone who had done this thousands of times, and Sophie stood in the living room amid the aftermath of floor nachos and ocean documentary and thought about the picture she'd had in her head and how thoroughly the reality had replaced it with something better. He came back and lowered himself onto the couch and looked at the cleanup situation. "She really committed to the floor eating," Sophie said. She always does. He picked up a stray chip. Sorry, this wasn't exactly... Don't, Sophie said. I was going to say I could have made a reservation somewhere, if you wanted... Landon. She turned to look at him. This is exactly what I wanted. I didn't know it before tonight, but it is. He looked at her. In the low lamplight of the apartment, with the city outside doing its New Year's Eve thing, the distant noise of it, the accumulated sound of several million people deciding this particular arbitrary midnight was significant, he looked like someone who was finally comfortable in his own living room in a way he hadn't been before. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. She helped him clean up. They were not efficient about it. The inefficiency involved a certain amount of proximity and a conversation about whether the Prosecco warranted glasses or was acceptable directly from the bottle, and they landed on glasses because Sophie drew a line somewhere, and they took the glasses to the couch and watched the city through the tall windows while the clock moved toward midnight in the particular way it did on New Year's, both slower and faster than expected. Can I ask you something? She said, around 11:30. You're going to anyway. Fair. She looked at him sideways. What do you want? Like, big picture, not work, not... She gestured, a gesture meant to indicate the empire, the holdings, the things that get written about. For your actual life. What do you want? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone stalling, but of someone taking the question seriously. I want Mia to grow up knowing she's the most important thing, he said. Not because I tell her, but because it's in how everything is built, the decisions I make, what I choose. He looked at the window. I want to keep building things that are worth something, not just valuable, worth something. There's a difference. Another pause. And I want... He stopped. What? He looked at her. I want what this is. I want this to be real, and I want to stop being careful around it. It's real, she said. I know. He held her gaze. I just wanted to say it out loud. Outside the window, New York began to make the noise it made at midnight on New Year's Eve. A particular accumulated roar, fireworks somewhere, horns, the generalized sound of people marking time together, even though they were strangers. The city did this once a year, this brief collective acknowledgement that time was moving, and they were all inside of it together. Landon kissed her at midnight. Not urgently. There was no urgency in it, just the particular warmth of two people who had earned the coordinates of each other and were no longer apologizing for being there. When they pulled back, she was looking at the window and the lights and the distant smoke of fireworks. I want to open my own place, she said. He turned to look at her. I know I said I didn't want to talk about it. She kept her eyes on the window. I've been thinking about it since you asked, since you said it wasn't insane. She was quiet for a beat. You said that, and I haven't been able to put it back where it was. Like it came out of this box I'd been keeping it in, and now it won't fit back in. Good, he said. She looked at him. It terrifies me. I know. I don't have the capital. I have some savings, but not... Sophie, I'm not asking you for money, she said quickly, clearly. I want to be very specific about that. I'm not. I know you're not. I just wanted to say it out loud, the same way you said it out loud, just put it in the room. She looked back at the window. I want to open a small place, neighborhood, the kind that's there for the people who live nearby. Good pastry, simple menu, the kind of place where someone comes in every morning and you know their order. She said it the way she'd said it in her kitchen weeks ago, with the particular quality of something she'd been holding for a long time. I've been carrying that picture for 6 years, and I keep putting it down because the timing isn't right, or the money isn't there, or I don't know enough yet. And I'm going to turn 31 next year, and I'm standing here thinking, when is the timing ever going to be right? He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, never. The timing is never going to be right. That's the thing about the timing. She looked at him. You build the thing, and then the timing becomes right retroactively, he said. That's how it works. Nobody who's ever built anything waited until it felt safe. Is that what you did? That's exactly what I did. I was 26 with bad credit and a business plan that had 3 significant holes in it that I didn't fully identify until 6 months in. He said it plainly, without romance. It was not a smooth start. You say that like it worked out fine. It worked out. It was not fine on the way. He shifted to face her more directly. Sophie, you've been doing this for 6 years. You know the business from the inside better than most people who try to open places from the outside. You know the margins, you know the supply chain, you know the customer side. You're not starting from nothing. You're starting from a foundation most people don't have. She looked at him. Are you trying to talk me into this? I'm trying to make sure you're not talking yourself out of it. There was a difference, and she felt it. I'm going to think about it, she said. Good. Seriously, not just say, I'm going to think about it, and then put it back in the box. I'll hold you to that. She believed him. Holding people to things was one of his qualities. Not in a pressuring way, but in the way of someone who took you at your word and expected you to take yourself at it too. She settled back against the couch, and he was close enough that it was natural for his arm to be around her, and it was. And the city outside kept doing its New Year's thing, and she thought about a small neighborhood bakery with morning regulars and orders she'd know by heart. The picture felt different when she let herself look at it directly. Less like a dream, more like a plan. January arrived with the particular bluntness of a New York January. Cold that wasn't picturesque, gray that wasn't moody, just the flat functional reality of the coldest stretch of the year. People moved through it without celebration. Heads down, shoulders up, the city in its most functional and least charming mode. Sophie and Landon settled into something. It wasn't a declaration. They hadn't made announcements or had the conversation that officially named what they were. They were both old enough to know that the naming conversation was less important than the actual ongoing practice of choosing each other. And they were both, in their different ways, more comfortable with practice than with declarations. What it looked like from the outside, to the people who saw it. He came to the bakery on Saturdays when she worked mornings, and they had coffee at the corner table and talked until she had to get back. She came to his apartment for dinner 2 or 3 times a week, and stayed late, and sometimes left in the early morning, and sometimes didn't leave. And Mia had absorbed this development with the equanimity of a child who had decided it was correct, and therefore was not worth remarking upon further. What it looked like from the inside to Sophie, like something solid being built one ordinary day at a time. Not glamorous, not the version of a relationship that she might have assembled from movies or other people's descriptions. More specific. More theirs. She also spent several evenings that January with a notebook and a calculator, and eventually a business plan that had 3 significant holes in it that she could already identify and was working on. She didn't tell Landon about the notebook yet. She wanted to know it was real before she said it out loud again. She wanted to look at the numbers and the possible locations and the specific shape of what she was imagining until she trusted that it wasn't just the midnight Prosecco talking. But she looked at it every night before she went to sleep. Gerald the ceramic elephant sat on her shelf next to the fish fruit bowl and watched her work. She had not expected, coming out of the worst year of her recent life, to arrive here. In this small apartment with its rearranged mugs and its mostly surviving plants, with a notebook full of possible futures on the coffee table and a number in her phone she could call at any hour without explaining herself. She had deleted everyone who wasn't real and kept one name. One name, and it had led her here. She was not someone who believed that things happened for a reason in any tidy or cosmic sense. She'd seen too much of the actual texture of life to believe in neatness like that. But she did believe in the consequences of choices, in the idea that what you chose accumulated quietly over time until one day you looked up and realized the choices had built something. She had chosen Landon 100 times without calling it a choice. He had done the same. And now they were here, in January, building something real and imperfect and entirely theirs. She closed the notebook. She texted him, "I've been working on something. Can I show you when it's ready?" His response came within the minute. "Yeah, whenever you're ready." She put her phone down and looked at Gerald on the shelf. Outside the window, the city did what it always did. Enormous, indifferent, moving. Inside, something was taking shape. The notebook had 17 pages by the time Sophie showed it to him. Not 17 clean, organized pages. 17 pages of cramped handwriting and crossed-out numbers and margin notes that referenced other margin notes, with occasional small sketches of floor plans that she'd drawn and then drawn over because the proportions were wrong. There were coffee stains on pages 4 and 11. a corner folded back on page 9 where she'd been flipping to it repeatedly. The whole thing looked like evidence of a person who had been thinking very seriously about something for a long time and had stopped being careful about it. She put it on his kitchen island on a Saturday afternoon in late January, while Mia was at a birthday party for 3 hours, and the apartment had the particular quiet that descended when Mia wasn't in it. Still, a little too big, like a room that hadn't been told yet it was allowed to relax. "Okay," she said. "This is rough, very rough. And there are holes. I know where they are. I flagged them. I don't want you to look at it like a business person. I want you to look at it like someone who knows me." Landon looked at the notebook, then at her. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "I know, but start with the second one." She pushed it across the island toward him. "Just read it first." He read it. She made tea she didn't drink and stood at his kitchen window and looked at the West Village doing its January thing below, so people moving fast, heads down, the cold making everyone efficient, while he went through the pages with the quiet attention he gave things he was taking seriously. It took him about 15 minutes. She knew because she was watching the clock on the microwave without meaning to. When he looked up, she turned around. "Okay," he said. Okay, meaning I read it." He put the notebook down flat on the island. "Tell me about the name." She blinked. "That's the first thing?" "You wrote it in the corner of the first page and then crossed it out and wrote it again smaller. It's the thing you're most attached to and the most uncertain about. So yes, that's the first thing." She looked at the notebook. In the corner of the first page, in her handwriting, half obscured, "Lune et pain," moon and bread, borrowed from the French, stripped down. She'd taken it from her years at Celine's Lune, carried it forward, adapted it. "It's probably precious," she said. "It's not precious, it's specific." He looked at her. "That matters. Specific is better than clever." He turned a few pages. "This space on Carmine Street. You've been back 3 times. Twice. You wrote about it twice and referenced it from page 3, which means you'd already been thinking about it before you wrote it down. 3 times. He looked up. "Is it available?" "I walked by last week. Still has the for lease sign. Have you called?" "Not yet." "Why not?" She crossed her arms. Not defensively, the way she did when she was holding something together. "Because calling makes it real. Right now it's still in the notebook." He looked at her for a moment, then he picked up his phone. "Landon, I'm not calling for you," he said. "I'm finding the listing so you have the number when you're ready to call." He turned the phone toward her. The listing was right there. The Carmine Street space, 800 square feet, the rent number that she'd already done math around and knew was tight, but workable if the first year went close to projection. "Here." She looked at the number on the screen. The thing she was learning had been learning since December, since the bakery, since the first time he'd told her it wasn't insane, was that Landon had a very specific way of helping. He didn't do things for her. He didn't move into the space of her decisions and start rearranging. He stood beside the thing she was afraid of and made it slightly more visible, and then stepped back and let her look at it herself. She took a photo of the listing with her own phone. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He closed the notebook and slid it back to her. "The holes on pages 12 and 13, your staffing projections for month 4 through 6. You're being conservative on the revenue side and aggressive on the staffing side at the same time. Those need to reconcile." "I know. And your equipment costs are based on new. Have you looked at commercial restaurant supply resale?" "Not yet." "Look." He paused. "The rest of it is solid. The concept is clear. The neighborhood analysis is good. You know that block. You know what's already there and what's missing. The menu scope is right. You're not trying to do too much." He looked at her directly. "This is real, Sophie. This isn't a dream in a notebook. This is a business plan with 2 solvable problems and a very good idea underneath it." She had been holding something together behind her sternum for weeks. She could feel the specific pressure of it. Not quite hope, not quite fear. The particular combination of the two that came from wanting something badly enough that wanting it felt dangerous. She exhaled. "I'm terrified," she said. "You should be," he said. "It's a real thing. Real things are terrifying. That's not comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to be accurate. He said it the same way Priya said it, which made her think there was something to the approach. Being terrified and doing it anyway is the whole job. She picked up the notebook, held it. Okay, she said, for the third time, and this time it meant something different than the first two. This one meant, I'm going to call the number. She called the number on Monday. February moved the way February moved, grudgingly, still cold, the city not yet willing to admit that anything was going to change. Sophie had 2 meetings with the landlord of the Carmine Street space and a conversation with a small business lawyer that Priya had referred her to, and she went through the equipment resale market the way Landon had suggested and found that her projected costs dropped by almost 30%, which changed the month 4 through 6 math in a way that made page 13 of the notebook considerably less alarming. She told Celine. She'd been dreading that conversation in the particular way you dreaded telling someone something that was good for you and complicated for them. Celine had hired her 6 years ago on instinct and had been right about it, and walking into that office and saying, I'm leaving, felt like a betrayal even though she knew it wasn't one. Celine listened. She sat behind her small desk in the back office with her reading glasses pushed up on her head and her arms crossed, and her face doing nothing in particular, which was how Celine's face looked when she was feeling something she wasn't ready to share. When Sophie finished, Celine was quiet for a moment. You should have done this 2 years ago, she said. Sophie blinked. I've been watching you manage this place with enough talent for your own place for at least 2 years, Celine continued. I kept waiting for you to quit. She uncrossed her arms. I'm not happy about losing you. I want to be clear about that. You're the best pastry hand I've had in 15 years, and replacing you is going to be a significant problem. She paused. But you should go. You've been ready. Sophie sat across from her and felt something she hadn't expected to feel in this conversation, which was something very close to gratitude for being seen clearly by someone who had known her work and still said, go. I'll give you proper notice, Sophie said. I won't leave you stranded. I know you won't. Celine stood, which was the end-of-meeting signal she used when things had been said that didn't need further words. What are you calling it? Lune épin. Celine considered this. Good name. You think? I think it sounds like something that will still be there in 20 years. She extended her hand across the desk in a gesture that was formal and also somehow more than that. Don't waste it. Sophie shook her hand. Walking out of that office, she had the specific feeling of a door closing behind her that she had been holding open with her foot for a long time, not quite willing to let it close. It closed. And the room she was walking into was large and uncertain and entirely her own construction. She called Landon from the sidewalk outside. She said I should have done it 2 years ago, Sophie told him. Smart woman, he said. She also said replacing me will be a significant problem. Also accurate? You don't know that. I know you. A pause on the line. How do you feel? She stood on the sidewalk in February, the cold doing its usual work, people moving around her with the focused efficiency of New Yorkers in winter. Like I jumped off something, she said, and I don't know yet if there's water or concrete. There's water, he said. You don't know that either. No, he admitted, but you know how to swim. That part I know. She stood there for a moment with that. Then, I'm scared, Landon. I know. Like, actually scared. Not the talking about it kind. Yeah, that's the right kind to be. His voice was steady in the way she'd learned meant he was being careful with something. Sophie, you called the number. You had the meetings. You told Celine. You've already done most of the scary part, and you're still standing. She looked at the street. Come over tonight, he said. Mia's been asking about you. She wants to show you something she found about emperor penguins that she considers urgent. Sophie laughed, and it was the real kind. The kind that came up without being planned. How urgent? In her words, extremely. Okay, she said. I'll be there at 7. She put her phone away and stood on the February sidewalk a moment longer. The city kept moving. It always kept moving. That was the deal with New York. It did not wait for you to be ready. And in that way, it was an honest place to build something. She started walking. Ma. The lease on the Carmine Street space was signed in March. 800 square feet that smelled like the previous tenant, a sandwich shop that had been there for 12 years before the rent increase had made the math impossible, and had floors that needed work, and a kitchen that needed more work, and a front window that was genuinely excellent, the kind that caught the morning light in a way that made the space look like it was worth more than it was. She stood in it alone the first afternoon after signing, before any of the work had started, and turned around slowly in the empty space. It was smaller than she'd pictured, in the way that real things were always slightly different from the pictures you built of them. The ceiling had a water stain in the back left corner. One of the wall outlets was positioned inconveniently. The bathroom was a problem she'd have to solve creatively, but the window was perfect, and the bones were right, and it was hers. She took a photo and sent it to Landon with no caption. He responded with a single word: yours. She saved that text. The renovation took 6 weeks and went 17% over budget, which was almost exactly what the contractor had warned her it might do, and which she had not fully believed until it happened. She was at the space almost every day, not because she needed to supervise every detail, but because she found that being in the middle of the construction helped her think. The noise and mess of something being built had a quality that her apartment didn't, something that kept her present and out of her own head. Landon came by twice. Once to look at the kitchen installation when she was worried the layout wasn't functional, and he walked through it with the specific attention of someone who understood space and said, "Move the prep station 2 feet left and you gain a traffic lane." And he was right, and she moved it. Once when she was there late on a Thursday, sitting on an overturned bucket eating a sandwich she'd brought from the deli around the corner, the space half-gutted around her, and the window casting the last of the evening light across the unfinished floor. He'd come with food, proper food, from the Thai place she liked, in the brown paper bags that smelled like every good evening she'd had recently. He sat on another overturned bucket and looked around at the space. "It's going to be good," he said. "It's going to be a disaster for at least the first 6 months." "Probably." He handed her a container. "And then it's going to be good." She looked at the window with the evening light in it. "I keep thinking about what Celine said," she told him, "that I should have done it 2 years ago. Does that bother you?" She considered it. "A little, in the way where you think about the time you spent not doing the thing and wonder what you were waiting for." She pulled the top off the container. "But then I think, 2 years ago I was still in a different place. Not just the relationship, me. I don't know if I would have done it right 2 years ago. You might have. Or I might have done it scared in the wrong way, and it might have failed, and I might have used it as proof that I was right to wait." She looked at him. "Timing isn't always just about readiness. Sometimes it's about which version of you is going to do the thing." He looked at her for a moment. "That's true. I'm full of insights occasionally, I've noticed." They ate on their overturned buckets in the unfinished space and talked about nothing in particular and everything in its way. Mia's recent conviction that she wanted to learn to play the drums, which Landon was taking seriously and the building's noise policy was less enthusiastic about. Priya's engagement, announced 2 weeks ago, to a man named David, who was quietly wonderful in the way of people who didn't need to announce it. The logistics acquisition, which had ultimately restructured in the way Landon had identified and gone through clean, the COO having been grudgingly right about the unwind after all. Small things. Real things. The ordinary ongoing business of 2 people whose lives had become thoroughly tangled together over the course of several months, and neither of them was untangling. "Hey," she said, when the food was mostly gone. "Hey," he said. "I love you." She said it the way you said something when you'd been waiting for the right moment and then realized there wasn't going to be a right moment, just the ordinary moment you were already in. Flat, direct, not decorated. I've been trying to figure out when to say it, and I keep deciding on later, and I'm tired of later, so there it is. He looked at her. The construction noise from somewhere in the back of the building, a worker finishing up something before calling it a day, filled the silence for a moment. "I've been trying to figure out when to say it since October," he said. She looked at him. "October? Maybe September. I was trying to be exact." "You've known since September." "I've suspected since considerably before September." He set down his container. I love you, Sophie. I've been loving you quietly for long enough that I lost track of when it started. Which I recognize is an absurd thing to say, but it's the most accurate thing I have. She looked at him across the small space between their overturned buckets, in the half-renovated room that smelled like sawdust and the ghost of a former sandwich shop, with the evening light through the excellent window going amber and soft. This was not the scene she would have written for this moment. She was in work clothes she'd been wearing since morning, sitting on a bucket, with Thai food containers on the floor beside her. It was not a movie, it was not dressed up. It was, she thought, exactly right. She reached across the space between them, and he took her hand. Neither of them said anything else for a little while. They didn't need to. You see, Schatz.
Lunit Payne opened on a Thursday in early May. Sophie had chosen Thursday deliberately. Not a Friday or Saturday, not the weekend when people were looking for experiences. Thursday, because the neighborhood regulars would come on a Thursday, the people who were actually going to make or break the place, the ones who needed a good bakery on a weekday morning and hadn't had one on Carmine Street since the old one closed 3 years ago. She had been at the space since 4 in the morning. Celine had loaned her a pastry assistant for the first 2 weeks, a young woman named Rosa who was 22 and fast and didn't need things explained twice. And between the two of them, by the time the front door unlocked at 7, there were croissants and morning buns and 3 kinds of bread and a small but considered selection of pastries in the front case, and the space smelled the way Sophie had always known a bakery should smell, warm and real and like something someone actually made. The first customer was an older man named Walter, who lived in the building 2 doors down and who had been watching the renovation for weeks from his morning walk, and who ordered a black coffee and a croissant and sat at the window table and read his newspaper for 45 minutes with the complete satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for exactly this and was now having it. Sophie watched him from behind the counter and felt something she didn't have a name for. Not pride exactly, more like arrival. The particular feeling of a thing finally occupying the space it was always supposed to occupy. The morning went well, not perfectly. A card reader glitched for 20 minutes, which meant a line that backed up and some apologetic improvising, and Sophie burned the first batch of morning buns because she was distracted and forgot to rotate the tray. But the people who came in came back out smiling, and 2 of them said they'd be back tomorrow, and by noon the front case was mostly sold out, which was both a success and a logistics problem she was going to have to recalibrate for. Landon came at 8:30 with Mia, who had requested specifically to be part of the opening day and who had negotiated with her school schedule with a focus that suggested a future in contract law. Mia walked in and stopped and looked around with the seriousness she gave things she considered important. "It smells really good," she announced. "Thank you," Sophie said. "Like, really good." She turned to look at the pastry case with the expression of a person doing a formal assessment. "Can I have one of those?" "Which one?" "The one with the sugar on top." "Morning bun." "That one?" "Yes." Sophie put one on a plate. Mia took it to the window table with the gravity of a food critic settling in for work. Landon came to the counter. He was in his coat, the December slush coat, which had become the coat of the whole difficult, beautiful arc of the thing, in her mind. He looked at the space, the window light, the display case, the chalk menu board she'd spent 2 hours on the night before. He looked at her. "How's it going?" he said. The card reader broke for a while. "I burned the first morning buns." "So good, then." "So good," she said, and meant it. He reached across the counter and took her hand briefly. Not long, because there were customers and she was working. Just a brief hold, the weight of it communicating something that didn't need words. "I'm proud of you," he said. She had been fine all morning. She had been professional and focused, and she had handled the card reader situation and the burned buns without unraveling. She had greeted every customer and meant it, and watched Walter read his newspaper and felt arrival. She was briefly, inconveniently, not fine when he said that. "Don't make me cry in my own bakery on opening day," she said. "Right. Sorry." He didn't look sorry. He looked like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. She made him a coffee. He took it to the window table where Mia had finished her morning bun and was now drawing something in the small notebook she kept in her pocket for exactly this purpose.
Sophie watched them through the morning rush, Landon reading something on his phone, occasionally looking up to say something to Mia, Mia drawing with the focused energy she brought to everything. The window light behind them was the good morning light, the light that made the whole space look like the picture she'd carried for 6 years. It was not the picture exactly. The picture had been cleaner, less specific. This was better because it was actual. The burned buns and the glitchy card reader and Walter's newspaper and Mia's drawing and Landon at the window table with his coffee, choosing to be here at 8:30 on a Thursday morning because this was what mattered to him. The same reason she'd kept his name. People asked later about how it had all come together. The bakery people asked about the business, how she'd made the leap, how she'd funded it, what the first year had really looked like. She told them honestly. She'd saved, she'd borrowed modestly, she'd been terrified. The first 6 months had been exactly the disaster she'd predicted. And then month 7 had turned a corner, and month 8 had been the first month she'd felt like it was going to survive. The staffing had been hard. The margins had been what she'd projected, and not $1 more. She'd cried in the back office twice in year 1, once about money and once about an employee situation she'd handled badly and needed to go back and handle better. She told them about Celine's loan of Rosa for the first 2 weeks, and Rosa staying on permanently because she was 22 and fast, and it turned out she had her own ideas about pastry that were worth listening to. She told them about Walter, who came in every morning now, and whose order she knew before he reached the counter. She told them about the regulars who had made the place what it was, not the press attention when a food writer had come in month 9 and written something kind, not the accolades, but the specific people who came in Tuesday and Thursday and Sunday and had made it theirs. The people who knew her and Landon asked about that too. How had it happened, they wanted to know. You'd been friends forever. What changed? She never knew quite how to answer that, because the honest answer was nothing changed. That was the thing. The feelings had been there long before they had language for them. The choosing had been happening long before anyone acknowledged it. We just stopped pretending, she said once, to Priya, who was getting married in October and had asked Sophie to be in the wedding and had also asked for the actual answer because she'd been there for most of it. Stop pretending what? Priya asked. That what we had was only what it was labeled. She thought about it. We'd been calling it friendship because that was the word we had, and then we ran out of road on that word and had to use the real one. Which is? Love. She said it plainly. It had gotten easier to say out loud, which was a thing she'd learned about saying the true thing. The more you said it, the less it required courage. We'd been loving each other in every practical way for 4 years. We just didn't say it until we did. Priya looked at her with the expression she wore when she was right about something and choosing not to say so explicitly. What? Sophie said. Nothing. I'm just noting that I knew. You knew. I knew from the farmer's market story, when Jenna told him about the contact purge. She sipped her coffee. A man who didn't love you would have filed that information and moved on. He turned it over for 2 months. He's a thorough thinker. He's in love, Priya said. There's a difference. Yeah. The October wedding was in a garden in Brooklyn. The kind of wedding that had taken 8 months to plan and looked, on the day, like it had come together effortlessly, which Sophie knew was Priya's particular genius. She sat at a round table with Jenna and Rosa from the bakery and a friend of David's who turned out to be a marine biologist, which Mia, seated next to her father 2 tables over, found intensely significant. Sophie watched Priya and David from across the room, the way they moved around each other, the way Priya laughed at something David said. The specific laugh that meant it had actually gotten her, not the social one. The way David looked at her when she was talking to someone else. That unguarded look that people had when they thought no one was watching. She felt Landon's hand find hers under the table without looking. She turned to him. He was watching the dance floor, a slight smile on his face. He wasn't looking at her. He was just holding her hand, the way you held something you didn't think about holding anymore because it was simply the state of things. She thought about a kitchen floor at 2 a.m. and a contact list and a name she couldn't delete. She thought about how small that moment had seemed when it happened. Just a woman sitting on a tile floor, overwhelmed, making an impulsive decision not to remove a single name from her phone. How something that small could be, in retrospect, the hinge everything turned on. The choices you didn't know you were making. The paths you were already on before you noticed. She had spent a long time believing that love was a thing that happened to you, that you found it or it found you, that circumstances aligned and timing cooperated and the right person appeared. She'd believed that because it was easier to believe than the alternative, which was that love was a practice, a daily choice made quietly, without announcement, in the ordinary moments when nobody was watching. She had chosen Landon when she chose to tell him the true thing instead of the comfortable one. She had chosen him when she picked up the phone at 2 a.m. because he needed someone to not be alone at 2 a.m. She had chosen him every time she'd told him about the bakery dream instead of burying it, every time she'd let herself be actually seen rather than the edited version that felt safer. She had been choosing him for years in every small way before she'd had the courage to choose him in the big, obvious, undeniable way. And he had been doing the same. That was the thing about this. The thing nobody told you about love when you were young and expecting it to arrive like weather, complete and obvious and impossible to miss. It didn't arrive. It accumulated. It was built in the daily ordinary choosing, the kind that didn't feel like choosing because it felt like just being yourself with someone. And then one day you looked up and realized the accumulated weight of all those small ordinary choices had constructed something you couldn't have built on purpose. You could only build it by living inside it. She squeezed his hand. He turned to look at her. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "More than." He looked at her for a moment with the look she'd come to know as the real one. Not the boardroom version or the public version, but the one he kept for the small circle of people he trusted with the actual self. The look that said, "I see you, specifically you, and I'm glad you're here." She was 31 years old. She had a small bakery on Carmine Street that smelled the way a bakery should smell, that Walter came to every morning. That was going to make it. She had Rosa, who was going to be extraordinary one day and was already halfway there. She had Priya getting married across the room and Jenna texting her from 2 tables over about the marine biologist. She had Mia, who had come to her that morning while she was doing her hair before the wedding and said, with the directness of a child who had been thinking about this and decided it was time, "I want to call you Sophie still. But I want you to know that's because it's your name, not because I don't think of you as family." Sophie had knelt down and looked at her and said, "I think of you as family too, Mia," and had managed not to cry until she got to the bathroom, which she counted as a significant personal victory. She had all of this. She had Landon, who was sitting beside her at a wedding table in October, holding her hand under the tablecloth, watching their friends get married and being, without needing to announce it, exactly where he wanted to be. The dance floor opened. Priya pulled David to it with the specific determination of a woman who had planned this day for 8 months and intended to use all of it. Landon stood up and extended his hand. "No," Sophie said. "Come on. I'm a bad dancer." "I know. Like genuinely bad. It's not charming bad. It's actually bad." "Sophie." He kept his hand out. The small smile on his face was the real one, the one that happened before he could organize his face into something more composed. "We can be bad at this together. That's what I said." She looked at his hand. She thought about December slush and a bakery corner table and the name she couldn't delete and a notebook with 17 pages and a morning bun and an overturned bucket and a ceramic elephant named Gerald who was still on her shelf at home, next to the fish fruit bowl, watching over her mostly surviving plants. She took his hand. They were bad dancers. She stepped on his foot once, and he miscalculated a turn and they were both laughing by the 3rd bar of the song, and the laughing made the dancing worse, and neither of them cared even slightly. Across the table, Mia was watching them with the expression of someone who had filed a report many months ago that events had now confirmed correct. Later, when people asked how their story had started, the billionaire and the pastry chef, the single father, and the woman who kept only 8 names, neither of them pointed to the billions or the business or the gap in their circumstances that the outside world always seemed to find interesting. Those things had never been the story. They had been furniture. The story was underneath. The story was this: 2 people who had known each other for 4 years, who had been quietly choosing each other in every small way, who had finally run out of road on the word friendship and had to use the true word instead. The story was the name she couldn't delete. The story was that they had already been building the future before either of them knew they were building anything at all. And on a dance floor in Brooklyn in October, stepping on each other's feet and laughing about it, they were still building it. One ordinary day at a time, one small choice at a time, the same way they'd been doing it all along.